Hello, my name is Gene Monterastelli, and I am the editor of tappingqa.com. And the video that you are about to watch is an interview that I did as part of the 24 Hours of Tapping. The 24 Hours of Tapping was a free event, which was a fundraiser for the Peaceful Heart Network. The Peaceful Heart Network provides training and trauma relief tools to those in war-torn countries, as well as working with refugees all over the world. They've been able to help out over 200,000 people all over the world. After you watch this video, if you find this video something that was useful, the very easy way that you can say thank you to the guest for giving their time and sharing their expertise is to go to 24hoursoftapping.com/support and make a small contribution to support the Peaceful Heart Network. Again, that is 24hoursoftapping.com/support, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. Our next guest is Melissa Beasley. Melissa built her skincare line, Love Essentials Skincare, while recovering from an abusive marriage, and now uses her experience to help survivors of domestic violence and spiritual abuse rebuild their lives. She coaches women one-on-one and offers mentorship programs. Her approach to healing is gentle and methodical, starting with learning to regulate and calm the nervous system using tools like EFT tapping, and progress to healing the trauma. Through this powerful process, she guides women to rebuild their lives by discovering where they have become stuck in their life, identifying their deep desires, and reconnecting with their inner strength. Without further ado, I welcome to the virtual stage Melissa Beasley. Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you, my friend?
Good.
Now, one thing that I'm most appreciative, so we have lots of, we've talked about this earlier. If you enter in the raffle, there are lots of really amazing training opportunities and books. And Melissa has put together what is my favorite thing, some of her handmade skincare and self-care goodies. And so one person is going to win a basket of those things as well. I can speak to them firsthand as I have used many of them in my own life, and I am a big fan. So one of the things that I've been talking, and I glanced off it a little bit in your bio, one of the things I've been asking people is kind of their origin story of how they found their way to doing the work that they're doing. Feel free to share as few or as many details that are appropriate in this particular setting, but kind of how did you find your way down this particular path? What did your transformation process look like? And then we can kind of talk into the lessons that have been learned from that.
Yeah. So how I found my way here was that 10 years ago, I think it is, I left a toxic marriage, moved myself and my two very small children in with my parents. And as I was a newly single mother taking care of these children and recovering from that abuse, I thought that would be a great time to start a skincare business and grow a business. And I quickly learned that there was a lot I didn't know about business and bumped up against a lot of the traumas and limiting beliefs from my past, and fortunately found myself invited to an EFT event, and specifically for using EFT for business, and entered into that. And so that was my introduction to EFT. I'd never heard of it before. I was just this young deer in the headlights girl who just wanted to sell skin cream, and found myself face to face with healing my trauma through emotional freedom techniques and building a business.
And so I think one of the things that I find fascinating in that is there was this thing that is traumatic, and the healing and the way that you stepped into that wasn't necessarily like trying to date again or trying to have a different type of relationship. It was something that feels like it is completely disconnected from the place that the trauma was happening. And so with that kind of realization and recognition, why does a trauma of an abusive relationship, be it physical, verbal, emotional, how is that, or why is that something that shows up in these other areas of someone's life after they've experienced something like that?
So abuse attacks your core. It really goes for your sense of self. And so over time, when you're in these toxic and abusive relationships, your confidence is affected, your belief in your abilities, your belief in your competence at things. You begin to tell yourself stuff like, I can't do that, I'm not good enough, it will never work. And that affects your ability to apply for jobs, to build a business, to stand up for yourself, in rebuilding your life, in being able to parent your children, draw boundaries. Like, this touches your sense of self, touches how you show up in life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so as you were stepping into that, what were the kind of specific lessons that you learned, or what are the things that people need to be paying attention to at the beginning of that journey? And maybe we can kind of walk through the stages of what healing and transformation looks like as we escape something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think for me, one of the first things I had to learn was self-care, which is why it's such a big part of my messaging now. From you and many of my coaches, heard you're not taking good enough care of yourself, you're overworking yourself, you're being too hard on yourself, until I started being really hard on myself for being so hard on myself. And so that was something that I had to work on, was just being kinder to me. Mm-hmm. But in answer to your how to start navigating this process, I really see EFT and emotional freedom as three kind of stages whenever I'm looking at someone who's coming out of an abusive relationship. For the first stage, we have the crisis stage. So for many people coming out of abuse, they leave that situation and it's immediately into a whole other fire. And so a lot of times you find yourself in court trying to advocate for custody, for child support, for alimony. You are trying to find a place to live. You are trying to figure out how you're going to take care of yourself. And all of this while you are dealing with the consequences of abuse, which has your brain in not a well-resourced state. You doubt yourself. You're not really thinking straight. And it's very difficult to make choices that are good for your short and long-term good. Mm-hmm. And so that first stage is really kind of like battle medicine, is how I see it. It's what are the things that you need immediately? You find yourself in court where oftentimes when you've been mistreated for years, you will present with a lot of anxiety, and it happens to a lot of men and women, but it's a lot of women have been abused, where the victim of the abuse will fail a psychology test. They will come out saying they're unstable, they have anxiety, and then the children will end up going to the abusive person because that person is able to be calm and collected. And if someone isn't trauma informed, then they will see that as that's the safe person, and the children will go with someone who's actually emotionally abusive. And so this is really common. And so if intervention can happen quickly, if that victim can get some, what I call crisis EFT, where they can help to regulate the nervous system, calm their emotions, learn some of the calming and containing techniques of EFT, so they can walk into that courtroom with a good head on their shoulders. They don't have to be healed. They just have to be able to bandage everything and really walk in a good state of mind for that court hearing, for these events.
And it's interesting you say that this is, over the course of the last 9.5 hours, over the conversations, this has come up multiple times, this idea of there's kind of like two types of ways that we can use a tapping protocol. One is triage in the moment so we can navigate what is in front of us. The other is going in, clearing out root causes, that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And because we can go after the root causes, and we think the root causes are the most important things for us to go after, oftentimes it's really easy for us to want to go rushing ahead and trying to get to the really, really deep things about what those specific instances are and the identity piece and all of that. And I really love the fact that you're giving voice to, right now, we just need to get your feet on the ground so you can navigate the particular task in front of you, so you can get to the next task to take care of yourself and your children if you're in a circumstance that you're trying to do that. And so I think that's a really valuable thing for us to be hearing in this moment.
Right. Because ultimately it's about the safety and well-being of the client.
Yep.
It's really easy when we've been practicing a long time to be like, I think I know the root cause and go for it. But doing that too soon is a really good way to re-traumatize someone.
Yep.
And that's not something we ever want to do. And so I really love really just gently, let's chip away at what's present and what we can get at right now to keep you and put you in a safe position. So that's the crisis stage.
Yep.
And then comes the survival stage.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, maybe they've gone through the immediate crisis things. They're kind of safe, but you're still a paycheck or two away from losing your house. You're still really not stable. And so this is, we talked about the short-term crisis and the long-term kind of two doorways with EFT. I also think about the idea of goal-oriented EFT as opposed to a more organic approach. And I think they both have their places. So goal-oriented is things like, you've got this court date. It's things like when I would work with people for their business success. What is your goal? I want to go to 3 networking events. Okay, did you do that? No, let's find out why. And so let's find the tapping using this goal as a doorway in, as opposed to the more organic, which is, how are we feeling? What's coming up for us? Let's tap on that. So crisis and survival are both still, I think, very goal oriented.
Yep.
So for survival, though, it's things like, okay, we're safe. We are no longer in immediate distress, but we don't like where we are. You probably need a better job. Like, what do we want to build to help you feel stable? So that you feel like you can breathe and are no longer in a place of survival. And so that might be things like, what kind of job would you like? And so for tapping on that, you're going to get into things like, do they believe in themselves enough to ask for the job they want? What kinds of skills do they have that they're not giving themselves credit for that they could go for? And so it's a little deeper. You're getting closer to the root causes. It's still very goal oriented. And it's still a little bit, it's not quite as crisis triage, but it is still a little bit treating the wounds, bandaging the surface stuff.
Yep. And what I like about what you're sharing here is, it's not, I am the survivor of this, therefore I tap on this thing. But I'm a survivor of this, therefore this is the first layer, this is the second layer, this is the third layer, and just kind of gently working your way as you're navigating that to put yourself into a position where it's possible for you to be successful as you're doing the work.
Yeah. I think of it like weeding a garden that's really overgrown. Like, you're not getting at any roots at first. You're going to trim away all the stuff that's up top. And then once you've done that, you can start looking at going for roots and mending soil and all of that. But like, at first, it is okay to just cut the stuff off the top so you can figure out what those roots are. Yeah.
So we've gone through crisis. We've gone through kind of getting ourselves back together in that particular way. What's then the next part of that?
So the next part is really I'm doing a lot of work in this part and I'm loving it. And it's the more long term. So they're to a place where they're safe. And the thing about this moment is your tool set that got you here will not get you past here. And so at this point, it's not as much about keeping yourself driven towards all the different goals. At this point, it's really about, who are you? Giving yourself the more open-ended time to allow for the more organic healing, which is really uncomfortable, I will say, for most survivors. I know this from experience, because you've spent so much time fighting to reach the next spot, to reach the next moment of safety, that being in a place of just being and relaxing into that being and allowing the more organic long-term healing feels weird. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that you identified there, which is really important to hear, not just for this, but in any sort of long-term transformational process, just because a particular tool got us to the next step doesn't mean it's the tool that gets us to the next step. I mean, oftentimes when I'm doing inner child work, like this, keeping your head down and not being noticed in your household as a 6-year-old with a bipolar parent, that is an awesome thing to keep you safely and get you out of there. And now that you're in your 30s and you're trying to grow your business, the tool that got you here so you could ask the question about starting your business is not the tool that gets you moving forward. And I'm guessing, and I would love to hear your thought on this as you've navigated folks through this process, that choosing the next set of tools or going on to the next set of tools can be a scary thing, because it's just like, oh, I've just learned these new tools. These new tools have helped me to stabilize and help me to get me to this particular place. What do you mean I have to use a different tool now?
Yeah. It's terrifying. And it's really hard to trust a process sometimes in that moment. And the thing about this point is, when you've been striving for a really long time, going for those more subtle changes. And here's the really big bit about this part is, now you're in a safe place. And so often what happens is you'll get to this place and you'll say, okay, I got through the crisis. I got to the stable part. Why am I so morbidly depressed all of a sudden? My life is way better than it used to be.
Yeah.
And what has happened is you have the stillness and the space for a lot of the wounds that have not been able to come up because it was not safe and it was not time for those to start presenting themselves, and for you to start being able to work those things out. And I find it really important whenever people enter this stage, I always tell them, start working with someone, find a practitioner, find a therapist. Don't do this part alone, because this part is messy, and it helps to have a guide.
Yeah, because I mean, I love the way that you described that. It's almost like, in a lot of ways, we're just thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When I'm trying to have shelter and food, I am not thinking about the existential crisis of my value in the world because of the stories of the relationships that have told me. And so, like, eating is more important than wondering about my identity in the world and how I fit into a relationship. All of a sudden, when I have that space, it's like, oh my gosh, all of this noise that before the noise was covered up by the crisis that's there. And I'm guessing this is a point where people start making self-destructive type choices with drugs, with alcohol, with shopping, with sex addiction, with whatever, to take something to fill up that particular hole, just to quiet down that particular process as they're navigating that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be a moment where this is the moment where you find yourself able to start rebuilding, and absolutely sabotaging that as well. Things are fine how they are. I do not need to go for that bigger job.
Right.
That kind of thing. And so what's really important here is, when I'm working with my clients at this stage, is we go really gentle techniques. And I've been doing this now with clients for a little while. And what I love about it is the ability to really work with survivors of trauma and abuse, and not have to go back into that trauma in order to heal a lot of those deep past wounds.
Yeah.
And so we take this approach that's very gentle, very stepping from the outside and kind of sneaking in towards whatever's going on, and always creating some distance. And so what we found is, it's possible to rename a thing, like the movie title technique, name something completely different, or, create an image of your mind that represents that thing and is not that thing, or put it in a jar and send it to Mars and tap on it over there. And they don't have to think about the story. They don't have to get into it and tell me what happened.
Yeah.
And we can tap on that jar on Mars,
Yep.
and it can actually help to clear the emotional charge of the traumatizing event that happened, and all of the issues that are still in their lives because of that event. And I'll say, as a practitioner, when I started learning this, it was really hard. I'm a go-getter. I want to dive in and attack the thing. And so this idea of, and our culture we live in is very much a do it the hard way, no pain, no gain. And so this idea that we can breathe easy and we can be really gentle, and we do not have to scream and cry and wail, and that we can heal this and move on without it having to hurt and feel like we're tearing into the trauma again, has just been a game changer for me in the way that I work with people.
And for, I mean, like one of the most significant difference with me working with a client today and me working with a client 15 years ago is speed, and the rate in which we're doing things, and the gentleness that we're doing stuff at. I think about there was a camp, an old camp outside of Des Moines that I was visiting as an adult, and they had this old bumper sticker around as a reminder. It was a youth camp, as a reminder of the things that we have learned and how we have changed. And the bumper sticker literally said, "Tears are contagious," as if that was a good thing. And
Right.
it was this idea, it was a youth ministry camp in this context of, if we get real about the emotion, then real transformation happens. And as a speaker and as a performer and someone who's worked with young people, like, you put me in front of 150 people, I can make 150 people cry. That doesn't mean that is a better or worse experience, but I know how to push buttons to make emotion happen. I love what you're saying here is it's not about the emotion, it's about the transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing in that very slow, gentle, deliberate work, oh my gosh, are there some really big emotions? And oh my gosh, does it become really, really painful? But the goal is not, ooh, let's go find the thing and poke it and make it really, really hurt. The goal is, great, let's do this in a gentle, thoughtful, deliberate way. And when it's time for us to do the heavy lifting is going to present itself. We're not going to go running after it.
Exactly. And so what's beautiful about that is you absolutely step in it all the time. You can be talking about the most mundane thing, and all of a sudden you're remembering this horrible thing that someone did to you when you were 12. And you just do in this work. And what's nice is being able to say, okay, we see that, and really gently tap them through, help them release those emotions and help them feel that. And then if it feels safe in the moment, we can work on that. If it doesn't, let's contain that. Let's tap that down a little bit. I had that with a client. I was looking through my notes for her. Something came up on like session 2. And it was very clear that this was wow, that's really interesting. Let's put that in a safe space, and we will come back to it when it's time. And then after about 5 months with that person, that same thing came up. And they were more calm when they mentioned it. We were totally able to work on it and tap on it. And it was able to clear after a few rounds of tapping. And I know that if I had insisted on us going into it on that second call, it would have been very difficult and re-traumatizing for them.
And I think the thing that's important to recognize when we're thinking about, traumas that happen inside of relationships, like the traumatic experience doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in our life. And, it's one thing if I'm in a car accident or something like that. Like it's outside of, like, I'm in a car a lot, but it's in this place where things that are happening inside of the relationship are happening in the home, where I spend time, where I might be eating, I might be listening to music that I like, the television might be on in the back of the room. And as we are imprinting and as we're learning from these traumatic experiences so that we can be safe in the future, that part of us that is imprinting and remembering that trauma doesn't know if the dog barking next door is associated with this particular thing, or the fact that Beyonce happens to be playing on the radio in the kitchen, or the fact that we happen to be eating chicken fajitas at this particular moment. It's just going, these are all the data points that are scary. Therefore, these are all of the things that are now scary in the world as we're navigating that. And so because that's the case, you can be talking about the mundane, most pedestrian thing. And I'm guessing in the work that you're doing, you hear the phrase all the time, this probably has nothing to do with it, but.
Yeah.
Because it feels like it's completely coming from left field, but in the way that we understand that trauma imprints on us, it's not, but it now gives us the window. You didn't chase it, but it showed up, and now it's time to do work on that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I love about this conversation is, you were talking about that youth camp with the tears are contagious thing. And I love that conversation because I've been in so many different circles where like that emotional manipulation was part of the process. You know, if we can get people crying and emotional and vulnerable, then it's easier to imprint them and kind of get them to take on the message we want them to take. And the thing is, when you've been in an abusive situation, you're in that emotionally heightened state for 24/7 for
Right.
years, and you're very used to that. And so coming into a healing space where you're intentionally constantly pulled out of that emotionally heightened state, having that state calm down, you have to retrain your nervous system to realize that, oh, I'm not supposed to be in this emotionally heightened and hyper aware state all
Yeah.
the time. And it takes time. I've found with a lot of clients, it's like they want the bells and whistles. They want you to manipulate them.
Yeah.
And that sounded harsher than I wanted it to, but it's like they
It's comfortable and
trust.
predictable.
Yeah. Well, and it's really important when someone has been told what to think and believe for a long, long time to help them gain the self-trust to decide what they think and believe, which is really scary. But what I also love is that just like the process is really subtle and mundane, the results are really subtle and mundane, which can be frustrating as a practitioner because oftentimes they don't see it. And so, sometimes it takes kind of showing and reminding like, hey, could you have done that little thing 6 months ago? And they're like, oh my gosh, no. And I had one of those moments recently, if I could tell you a story.
Yes, please.
So my son, who's 10, we had been shopping and he had begged me to buy him this box of vanilla wafers because they were by the checkout stand. I was like, sure. So we take those home. We have them. They've been in the house for one day. And I'm in the kitchen with them. He swipes his arm and knocks that box off, but he goes to catch it. And he does catch it upside down and every single cookie, including all the crumbs. There was nothing left in that box. Comes out of it into the dishwasher. And my brother's in the living room at the time. He's cracking up. I'm cracking up. Everyone's laughing. And once we all stop laughing, we clean up the stuff we could get off the dishwasher. There was a bunch of it back inside that was soggy because the dishwasher had been dirty. So we just ran it twice. We left the cookies in there. We ran it a couple of times. We laughed. I bought a new box of cookies the next day. And it wasn't until a week or two later that I was thinking back on that moment. And I thought 10 years ago, Melissa might have yelled at him for that.
Yeah.
Like that could have so easily been a moment where I didn't have the emotional resources to be okay with that happening.
Yeah.
And at the best, I might have been really snippy and frustrated. And at worst, I might have yelled and gotten really upset. And that would have become a core memory for my son.
Yeah.
And instead we just laughed. And I didn't even have to think about that. But I realized that, and it's because of, even 3 years ago, I might have had a hard time with it, but I've been in the stage of the long-term deep healing. And it's just like, oh, that's different now. I'm not behaving the way I did 5 years ago.
And that's, as a practitioner, it's one of the reasons why I try and take really good intake notes so we can do those sorts of things, because when the new normal becomes normal, we don't forget what it was like before. We just assumed it's always that way. The stupid analogy I always give is I have distinct memories of being in the minivan with my mother, learning how to drive, and both of our cars were standards. So it was a process, and being in the little Subaru hatchback with my father and learning how to drive. I have very distinct memories of learning how to drive. I can't remember not knowing how to drive. Like if I imagine my 12-year-old self, I can't imagine how scared my 12-year-old self would be behind the wheel of the car, because I'm bringing the information of knowing the skill and being able to step into it. Even though I distinctly remember this moment in time when I was 15 years old, learning how to do this thing, I can't remember not that. And as these subtle changes happen, and sometimes we are able to recognize them. One of my favorite emails from a client of all time was an email that said, I made 2 phone calls today. And like, I cried when I saw that email, because it was such a heroic, big thing that very, very quickly became normative to that client. Which is awesome, because that's why we're doing it. Like, we're not doing it so I can get flowers thrown at me because I got her to, but was able to help her to do that. But you're right, because these changes are so subtle and we're just like changing who we are interiorly, it's such a gentle thing. It's really easy to miss. And I think that's also part of the attraction to these mountaintop transformational experiences because I'm able to point very, very directly. On this day, I went after this issue, and therefore I'm able to say I am a new person because of that particular thing. And it's, less appealing to change subtly. I want
Right.
firecrackers. I want a parade. I want people throwing flowers. I want everybody to notice that I am a new person.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's something to the mountaintop experiences. It's part of the human experience. And
Yeah.
sometimes like a good recharge like that, it can really set you up and help you feel recharged and happy and motivated and ready to go.
Yeah.
And it's the mundane every day that really gets you there. My older son has insisted on having long hair, and he has a very sensitive scalp. And so brushing that hair has been fun. And we actually did some surrogate tapping on him because we were working on surrogate tapping in our training. And I asked him, can we tap on you brushing your hair? And he said, sure. And we did. And it took a couple weeks to integrate, but now he brushes it all the time. And he came out and he was like, Mom, I just brushed my hair. I'm keeping it brushed. I love this. And he goes, it must be the new brush you got me. Like,
right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yep, you're right. 100%. It was the new brush. That was the problem the entire time.
Even though I bought you 5 brushes.
Yep. And what's happening in that particular experience is something that we call the apex effect, where we are giving credit to the apex of our experience. And for him, it didn't feel good, now feels good. Well, what's the thing that I know is I know that this shirt is itchy and this shirt is not. So by changing shirts, I feel better. So it makes perfect sense that that's the thing that gets credit, is the fact that we change brushes, because that makes way more sense than Mom and her wacky friends tapping on their body for me at distance. And now I feel better, even though like I understand, like you have like these delightfully awesome woo children who are way open to that stuff because of the way they've been raised. And still, yeah, sure, Mom, you and your friends tapping on, that's the reason why I can do this thing. And we can see that being dismissed so easily out of hand.
Right. Hours after they were playing with my pendulum. Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah. And so, and then another example with that same son, he was recently diagnosed with a collagen condition. And it basically, his collagen doesn't really get built properly. And so he has really bendy arms, which is kind of the party trick part, but also he can pass out randomly. Sometimes he has gut issues. Sometimes he has days where he's just kind of floppy. And it just has caused issues.
Yep.
And those issues showed up in the middle of the pandemic 2020 when we started homeschooling. And it was really easy at first with everything else going on to get really mad at him and to say, you're faking this. You need to buck up and try harder. You know, I've lived my life pushing against obstacles and trying to defeat them and beat them. And you know, until very recently, that was how I approached things. And I realized after a couple of weeks that wasn't working. He really didn't feel good and he wasn't faking this.
Yeah.
And that part of me that had started to heal and say, you weren't faking it when you had chronic illness. He's not faking it either.
Yeah.
Had to say, okay, maybe he just doesn't want to do a school, but maybe that's not the case. And I don't want him getting imprinted with, I'm not good enough and have to push myself into chronic illness the way that I was. And so I started working with him, started giving him the benefit of the doubt, started seeking answers, and come to find out a year and a half later, he has a legitimate condition. And I'm like, what if I hadn't gotten this healing work and hadn't been able to recognize that I was doing that to him? Yeah.
So tangentially to all of that, you know, you are a researcher, you are smart, you are self-possessed, you are hard driving. As you were navigating getting out of a toxic relationship and getting onto the other side of healing, what were the obstacles that you were facing in order to not have to do all of this internal work on your own? And how can people recognize when they need to reach out for help and not be the person who's bucking up and pushing their way through it?
So first I'll say at this point, always reach out for help. I've been doing that for my whole life. But I think if you're in a situation where So the way that I got into the really deep long-term healing was I actually realized that I wanted to work with people, and I didn't know how I wanted to work with them. And I knew someone that I said, I want to be that for the people I want to help. And so I reached out to her and said, hey, do you train people to do what you do? And she said, yeah. And she basically said, the first 2 years is just going to be us working on your stuff because you have to do that to be good at what you do. So to know to reach out for help, if you are finding that you are trying so hard to rebuild your life and nothing's working, and it feels like everything's a crisis, that's a really good sign that you just need to regulate your nervous system more. Because I have found, arguably, the last 2 years, I've had more things come at me than I have in some of the other years that I've had to tap on things. But I also have not been nearly thrown off by all of it, simply because of the depth of work that I've done.
Yeah.
And so I would say, if you're in a place where it's like, I'm constantly putting out fires, nothing is working and everything is against me, that's a really good sign of, I should probably go and get some help regulating my nervous system so that I can have a better head on my shoulders to make choices about what I need to do moving forward.
So would you be willing to lead us through a little tapping right now on giving ourselves permission not to have to do it all by ourselves, and recognizing the fact that as we navigate this stuff, reaching out for help is the natural, right, healthy thing for us to do as we navigate this?
I can do that. Okay. Reaching out for help is okay to do. So what would you like me to do here? Just kind of...
Yeah, let's pretend I am in a circumstance where I am doing a very bad job of reaching out for help, and I have to do everything by myself, which is completely out of character for somebody like me.
Okay, so I'm talking to someone like that, and I'll say, okay, I'd probably start with, where in your body do you feel it when you think about reaching out for help?
So for me, when I do that, I feel like someone's kid brother who is tagging along and should be figuring it out on his own and shouldn't be depending on the other people around him.
Okay. So probably with that, I would pick something out. And I know I heard you discuss this earlier, but the idea of tapping on the negative being an okay thing. So what I would do is I'd pick out that statement. I shouldn't be reaching out for help. And so then I might tap on something. So we'll just tap through it. Even though I shouldn't be reaching out for help.
Even though I shouldn't be reaching out for help.
I deeply and completely love and accept myself.
I deeply and completely love and accept myself.
Even though I shouldn't be reaching out for help.
Even though I shouldn't be reaching out for help.
I deeply and completely love and accept myself.
I deeply and completely love and accept myself.
Even though I shouldn't be reaching out for help.
Even though I shouldn't be reaching out for help.
I deeply and completely love and accept myself.
I deeply and completely love and accept myself.
So then we're going to tap through. I shouldn't be reaching out for help.
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 Deep breath. So then I would say, what did you notice as we tapped? And how does I shouldn't be reaching out for help feel to you now as opposed to the first time we tapped through?
So it's really interesting as we did that, like no reframing, no nothing else. Like it just is softening in its power. Not that it was like super, super powerful, but because it's an issue. It's not an issue, but it's there occasionally. And yeah, it just feels, it feels like with each successive tap, it felt slightly more farcical that I was saying it out loud, and it was just gentle, and it was just releasing in that way.
So I love the way you said that. I don't reframe my clients. Partly because they have been told what to think for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And so often what I'll do is we'll tap like that. And if it's at, 10, 7, 8, something like that, we'll just keep tapping. And then as we tap, they might remember where this came from. And if that happens, we might tap on that. But we'll keep going until they come up with the reframe. They might say something like, of course I can reach out for help.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll tap that in. And so I always tap until the charge is so low that their own higher self comes in and is like, please, of course you can reach out for help.
Mm-hmm.
And so often when that happens, their reframe will be completely different from what I was wanting to get them to think. Yeah. And a lot of times they're not ready for, I'm a big, amazing boss girl who can totally get this. They're not ready for that. And if I try to do that, all of their walls are going to go up and I will have lost a lot of the progress we made that day. But if they're like, maybe I could take the next step, then that's a win. And we'll tap in, maybe I can take the next step. And so I always wait for them to find their own reframes.
And what you're talking about is, what we were just talking about in the last couple of hours when Craig was talking about a trauma-informed approach. Mm-hmm. What you're doing is, because of the nature of the audience that you're working with, you're being super, super careful and deliberate to understand not just this moment of transformation, but what is the context that our interaction is sitting inside of? And that's not just a transformational context, it's the context of their life. And they're showing up in a very particular way that allows that to do that. I mean, I've learned in my own practice, like just because of who I am and how I approach the world, like I really like gallows humor when we're responding to something that is traumatic, because for me, that is something that is really, really super useful. And as a general rule, I have a good sense of where my clients are, and I do a good job of attracting folks that make sense for that. And I can remember very, very vividly working with someone about 3.5 years ago and watching him physically wince as we stepped into something like that and going, oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. I've completely misread the situation in understanding where this particular person is in their transformational process, and have hurt rapport and have made this harder for me to be a helper because I was less aware of where they were standing at that particular moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing to keep in mind as we talk about this really gentle, gradual approach for that last leg of the healing process, which is a really long leg, is the first bit, it's messy, it's tedious, you're chipping away at something. But I found that over time, as you create more and more breathing room, I think I heard you compare it to untying knots in a necklace one time. Like as you get it looser, things move much more quickly. And so if you're willing to be patient in the beginning and gain that rapport and get that nervous system calmed down, then after a few months, like suddenly massive changes start to happen in their nervous system and in their lives.
Yeah. I like to think about it a lot of times as well as kind of like water flowing under sandstone. That the water is slowly eroding away the sandstone, and at the surface, the stone has not changed in any way. And then all of a sudden it's just a sinkhole because the underpinning things have gone away. The other thing I think is important inside of what you're saying there is, with every round of tapping, we can have one of three responses. It can get less intense, which means we're heading in the right direction. It can stay exactly the same, which means we need to find a different approach or spend more time here, or it can actually go up. And as uncomfortable as it is to have it go up, that's actually good news, because it means that we are getting closer to the thing that we need to be going after, which is all fine and good over the course of a couple of rounds of tapping when we go up and down like this. The work you're talking about here, that going up, doesn't happen in the first 4 minutes of the session, then it goes down. Your going up as we unearth this stuff can be days, weeks, time. And it's like, oh my gosh, I am paying someone to unearth all of this crap and to make it feel more miserable as I'm navigating all of this stuff. And I'm sure that requires a dramatic amount of pre-framing as you're stepping into these sorts of things, so that you're setting the expectations well for the people that you're going to be working with.
Yes. And lots of let's spend these first couple of months regulating your nervous system, teaching you some self-soothing, teaching you how to handle those moments, and the pre-framing. And with my clients, like, they have Boxer access to me. And so I might not always be able to like get on a call right away for them to vent, but they can always spew at me through Boxer.
Yep.
And then I am there for them in that way. And so I know what it's like. Sometimes you just have to spew. And so I'm available for that, because sometimes life happens. And that kind of support is important. But yes, you were right. Over the timeline, things come up and get difficult. But pre-framing and teaching the nervous regulating techniques early on really helps with that process.
Awesome. Well, Melissa, thank you very much for your time. And I have, as a person who has gotten to watch your journey along the way, I've been first immensely proud to watch all of the transformation you've done in your life. I'm now immensely proud to see that you were turning that into something that is giving other women the opportunity to go through what you did without having to fight as hard as you did. And so the fact that this is the place that you've landed in the world and this is the work that you're doing, you have no clue like how happy it makes me, but also how proud I am of you, of this so hard work, and how you're not just taking care of you and those two little cutie pies, but you're getting an opportunity to take care of other women in the world. And so thank you very much for your time, but even more so, thank you for doing that really hard work internally so that you can be that for other people in the world as well.
Thank you.
Awesome.